I mentioned something with regards to coffee and Sabbath, and the variance in comments that I was receiving were rather drastic. So it basically made me go back and try to research cooking on Sabbath and trying to figure out where that line is drawn. And again, my opinion of what it was yesterday may not be what my opinion is tomorrow. But so many people got hung up on the idea of, oh, it's not work to cook. It's so simple to cook. And I totally agree. I don't think it's work to cook. But it's not really a factor of whatever I believe. It's a factor of what the Creator believes and what He has told us to do and how we're to respond to it. If we are wrong, we are sinning. It may be an unintentional sin, but it's still sinning. And so our constant desire should be to meditate on the Word and to become better each time. With that being said, there are some verses, and let's kind of walk through these verses. Now, the first one is as it pertains to work, which is Exodus 21:10. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. Now, the word work there is melakah, which is occupation or work. And this became a very personal thing to me. When I first came to faith, in addition to going to a congregation for Messianics, I went to a synagogue for a while. I wanted to be around my brothers Judah. And I actually stopped going for two reasons. But one of them, which was the major reason I stopped going to their services, is because after the service they would have a meal. And they had people there to provide the meal, and were cooking the meal on the Sabbath. They were cooking the meal on the Sabbath. And so I asked the rabbi about it, and he said, well, they're the ones doing it. He was paying them. The synagogue was paying these people to work on the Sabbath. Now, obviously, they didn't pay them on the Sabbath. They paid them on a different day, but they were paying them for the work they were doing on the Sabbath. So, obviously, I had some problems with that and dropped out. Now, again, on cooking, it's not a factor of the work issue. It's a different issue. And what we start with that is in Exodus 16:23. He said to them, this is what the Lord commanded. Tomorrow is to be a day of Sabbath, a rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. So bake what you want to bake and boil what you want to boil. Save whatever is left and keep it until morning. Now, many people have come to say, after this specific verse, with regards to baking and boiling, well, it's whatever's left. So it's whatever they didn't cook. But that is in violation, and I'll come back to 16:23 in a second. Exodus 16:5. On the sixth day they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other days. So that prepare is kun, which is to be firm or prepared. So they have to cook it on the prep day. Exodus 16:5. So this whole idea of, because they didn't cook it, they can cook it later, that would be against Exodus 16:5, which is again the same chapter which we have for Exodus 16:23, that you're not to bake it or boil it. Now, what remains is the word adaf, which is what's in excess, and what I would think of as leftovers. To boil is bashal, which is to boil, cook, or grow right, and bake is afah, which again only means to bake. So that starts running into an issue on what things can we cook. If it needs to be baked or boiled, we have to do it before the Sabbath. And so I think of things like salad or sandwiches. Well, those are always easy because I'm not having to bake or boil anything. I just put them together. That's as simple as it can be. I don't think of it as work. It didn't say we couldn't prep the food as in putting the sandwich bread together. It just says if we had to bake it or if we had to boil it, then we had to do it that way. So the question then comes in, can you reheat it? And on the issue of reheating, this is one where I might have to change what my viewpoint is. Now, a viewpoint that I had was that if you bake or boil something, as you're cooking it, you change what it is and you make it into something else. Such as, let's assume I take a raw carrot or a raw potato and I cook it. It's hard before I cook it. Once I cook it, it becomes soft. Once it's soft, I can't make it into a raw potato again or a raw carrot. I have changed it. If I've boiled or baked it and I have changed it and then I reheat it, I'm not changing it again. I'm just changing the temperature of it. So I'm not seeing an issue as it pertains to reheating there. The same thing is true. Let's assume that you have a steak. Once you cook your steak and you sear it, it becomes brown. You're not going to get it back to a raw state. Now, if you put it in the refrigerator and heat it back up, then it's not a big deal. It's still going to taste just like it did when you cooked it before. Now, it may have a little difference because you're just reheating it, but again, it'll taste somewhat similar. It's not going to taste like the raw piece of steak that you had. One of the easy ways to think about this is with pasta, dried pasta. If you boil your dried pasta, it becomes soft. You can put a little Tupperware container, you can put it in the refrigerator for a while, and it stays soft. It's not going back to hard. The only way to get it back to hard, I assume, is to put it out in the open air and let it dry itself out, if that even does it. I don't know. I've not done that. Now, another way to think about this thing, again, I'm going to give two more examples, and one of them is as I do lasagna. When I take lasagna and I boil my noodles and assume that the boiled noodles has already been done, but I put it in the thing and I add my tomato sauce and my cottage cheese. And I use cottage instead of ricotta. And then I top it with the mozzarella and obviously some seasonings. If I were to eat that raw, it tastes horrible. But if I cook it and I bake that for 45 minutes, then I am actually changing the flavor profile of that. Once I put it in the refrigerator and I heat it back up, it tastes just like it did when I cooked it after 45 minutes. Because I have changed it. The same way with a pot roast or like vegetable soup. Once you have cooked it, it's changed what it is. You're not going to get it back to the original flavor profile. So with this thought, my general idea is, sure, I don't see a problem with reheating, but I could be wrong. So let's look at some of the other verses here. Exodus 35:3. Do not kindle a fire in any of your dwellings on the Sabbath day. Now the word kindle is bayar, which is to burn or consume. Now many people have looked at this and said, well, this pertains to heating your home. I don't think so because of where it was done, but it could be. But when they were doing the Exodus, again, they're walking through a desert. They've got over 2 million people. There's not enough firewood to heat up their homes and their tents. There's barely going to be enough for them to do the fires for cooking. So I think that's more appropriate to what it is, but that's trying to put things in context, and I could be totally wrong. Now, there are some things where I would say, if you've done something and you're not taking any part in it, let's assume that you've got a home with electric heat. You put a temperature gauge on there. You could be 3 years and never know anything has ever happened. You're not starting, you're not doing anything because it's being taken care of it by itself. You're not involved. If you've got a gas furnace downstairs with, again, it's on a thermostat, it's doing everything. You're not even involved in that in any way, shape, or form. All you do is set the thermostat. If you lower the thermostat, you haven't changed the fact it's still on. It's still going through its rounds. Now, some people will try to say, well, this is a prohibition, but it doesn't apply to pure cooking. And again, I can't see that at all. But we do have another indication, which as it pertains to the high Sabbath. And the specific high Sabbath that it's talking about here is the high Sabbath, and again, there are 2 high Sabbaths in unleavened bread. Exodus 12:16. On the first day hold a sacred assembly, and another on the 7th day. Do no work at all on these days except to prepare food for everyone to eat. That is all you may do. So it's making a specific exception for a high Sabbath that you can cook on a high Sabbath. Does that mean you can cook on a Sabbath? It doesn't say that. In fact, it says the exact opposite. Exodus 16 is pretty well saying you can't do it on a Sabbath, but you can have a specific exclusion on a high Sabbath. Now, I know Rabbi Steve from MCOI says if the high Sabbath falls on the same day of the Sabbath, then the Sabbath takes control, you don't cook. So, and I think that is the appropriate way to do it, is to say, we err on the side of caution. And the other issue here, again, we try to walk things through and look at aspects, letting the Bible define the Bible. We have Colossians, which again is Paul, which is very difficult because he's so easily twisted. But he says, therefore do not let anyone judge you by what you eat or drink, or with regards to a religious festival, a new moon celebration, or a Sabbath day. The word any man there is tis. But that being said, is a man judging us, or is the Creator judging us? Because I know it's the Creator. So is Paul actually saying, don't let men judge you on this? It's the Creator who's going to judge you by this. So who you're trying to please is not mankind, it is the Creator. If he sees you doing this, he's looking to see how much you're thinking about what you're trying to do to follow through. Now we also have, as it pertains to work, we also have Nehemiah 10, verse 31, which adds some flavor to the idea of work, and that is not to buy or sell on Sabbath. Again, this is what I have. I've always had the idea that we could reheat, but realistically, I have to concede that we may not even be able to reheat. And I think about that again for the time that they were on the Exodus. If they weren't able to start a fire or to consume a fire, and maybe they were just able to keep logs on it and keep it going, maybe not. But if they weren't able to put logs on it and continue that during the Exodus, and even if they were, remember at that time they're only eating manna. They're not eating quail. The people who tried to eat the quail died while it was in their teeth. Numbers 11, 31 through 34, I think. So they didn't have quail, so the only thing they had bread. Well, bread was baked before. It didn't matter. You don't have to heat bread back up the next day. Bread is bread. So bread is great. Again, my thought process is to do a salad. It's such an excellent thing to do. Take some cheeses. Cheeses you don't have to cook or bake or boil or anything. So they're already prepped and ready for you to go. So it's the simplest thing out there. There are things where you are not going to run into any issue. Whether we can reheat, that's a real question. I don't know that they did on the Exodus. And if we're looking at the Exodus for a guidepost, maybe not. Maybe not even reheating the food. Just try to, do sandwiches. Do some breads. It's not whether it's difficult or not. We all know when we came to this faith, things we originally thought were difficult really weren't that difficult. We went and started doing them, and we were blessed by them. So, maybe I need to even become more restrictive. And there's one final point. That's one thing I'd like to point out. And that is as it pertains to John 14:21. Whoever has my commands and keeps them is the one who loves me. The one who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I too will love them and show myself to them. So when we have that desire, I'm going to do it no matter what it is, no matter how much of a pain in our butt this may be. And again, the issue there was coffee. And I have some feelings of my own as it pertains to coffee because of my mother, watching my mother when I grew up. Some people are more susceptible to certain drugs and foods than others. My family, we are very susceptible to caffeine. And my mother, who is highly intoxicated, or addicted to caffeine is probably a better way to say it. And so every few years, my mother would try to stop drinking coffee, and it always handled or was dealt with the same way. She would go through DTs, and for the first 3 days, she would throw up constantly, and she'd be shaking like crazy. And we would be driving home, and usually in a 20-mile drive or 10-mile drive, she'd stop 3 times to throw up on the side of the road. And after she got the coffee out of her system, she would go a few months, sometimes as many as 6 months, but usually around 3 months, without drinking any caffeine. And what caught her every single time is iced tea. And so as soon as she had an iced tea, she was back on coffee the next day or the day after that. Because once she hit that caffeine hit, she was gone. She was lost. And that's kind of one of those things of how we should follow commandments. If you stay on that straight and narrow path, it doesn't take much to veer you off, and boom, you're off real quick. It's the same thing for an alcoholic. And again, we've come out of Babylon. We're kind of alcoholics. It doesn't take much to just push us off a little bit, and all of a sudden we are way off. And if an alcoholic, the one thing he can't do is drink alcohol. If he goes to a party or somebody died, he's not to be drinking alcohol, because the next day or the 2 days later, he could be on full bore alcoholic again, where he's drinking heavy every single day. They have to be very careful. We have to be very careful in following the Torah and doing it exactly as it's indicated. So it's just something to think about, whether you think this applies to you or not. Again, I think it applies to me, so I'm the one who deals with my own actions.